your podcast app. You'll see there's a discourse happening. Is this book a masterpiece or problematic? One's a lifelong diehard fan, the other's a first-time reader. Both are really smart and funny and attractive. Sweet feather, sweet feather. Talking trends and hierarchy. Sweet feather, sweet feather. Relentless focus on their body. Sweet feather, sweet feather. What do they mean by all-American? Sweet feather, sweet feather. No sex, just titillation.
How are you?
I'm good. It is quite the heat wave in the Bay Area. It was 100 degrees yesterday. It's like 90 something right now. Famously, our air conditioning has been out for almost a month, and it was supposed to get fixed next week. And then out of the blue this morning, Martin gets a phone call. I say, "Who's calling?" "Air conditioning repair people. They've got a slot this afternoon. Would we be willing to be slotted in?" "Oh, yes, we would be willing to be slotted in. Yes, we would."
That's a nice girl. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad they're coming today. I'm so happy for you.
Me too. It feels like a miracle. That's all I'm going to say.
Today's book is Sweet Valley High, number 41, Outcast, and we're back on computer mediated today.
Yeah. As you could probably hear in our voices, we are no longer physically co-present. The loneliness rushes from one end of the earth to the other. Shall we with the cliffhanger from On the Edge?
I believe what we shall with is
Oh,
the
six-word
six-word
review.
reviews.
Robert Marks, you're beautiful, but you can't remember a goddamn thing. Okay. Mine is Runaway Again, but without bus chase. This is the same book as Runaway, but without the bus chase.
Certainly, this is so. Yep. This book has a lot of parallels to Runaway. I felt that way too. You know, some familiar friends, watch out, he's got a knife, showed up to meet us again, and we said hello. And
Oh,
this
it's
is watch out, he's got a knife. You know, some
It's
of
a
our
hello.
familiar friends came to greet us. And yet some developments on old friends or new friends, I think, came to play as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Making meaning with blame and legacy.
Mm.
You know, the book is it's the fallout of the last book. The last book was On the Edge, where historic thing happened. Regina Morrow, beloved character,
May her memory be for a blessing.
died after having a rare reaction to snorting 2 lines of coke that was a heart attack that was triggered by a previous heart condition. In the context of alienation from her friends and social pressure and all sorts of factors.
And her boyfriend cheating on her.
Yes. And
her friends being total shitheads. Sorry, I've totally dealt with it and processed it, so I'm fine.
yeah, you know, I'm listening back to the previous one. You're really, really invested in the sort of defense of Regina, and we're going to talk about why today. Because it's like you're arguing against no one. Like, it's like I'm not saying Regina, like, we should be.
You literally said she's asking for it. You literally said, when you dress like that and you do 2 lines of coke, you were asking to have a rare heart condition and die. You literally said that.
When you wear a cardigan. So this book is the fallout of that, and everyone's processing their grief, and a lot of that has to do with processing questions of guilt, blame, responsibility, and so on. And yet we have the other impulse, right? The impulse which is the more positive and productive and healing way to honor the memory, which is legacy, which is a fundraiser.
Which is pulling a knife on someone and potentially stabbing them.
One must.
One simply must.
Pull a knife.
One must. In this day and age, one must have a knife and one must pull it. You want to hang on a cliff or something? So it's important for listeners to understand, especially if you're picking up now in this episode. I don't know why you would
God
be.
bless you.
God
God
bless
bless
you.
you, because
There is a
you
special
have
place in heaven.
you have an adventurous spirit, the likes of which I've never seen in all my years.
No.
It's like the people on the documentary, The Longest Breath. There's something inside them that wants to make them dive under the water, see how long they can go there without breathing, and maybe they'll die, maybe they won't. They just have this seeking. It's a seeking
Yeah.
nature.
I don't have that. I have a sitting nature. I like to sit. So it's important to know that Regina was at a party at Molly Hecht's house when she consumed the fatal cocaine.
It's very, very important to know this fact. It's very important to know this fact, Robert. Tell them why.
What do you mean?
Or
Because
just go
Molly
on.
Hecht is she's like
just
the main character of the next book.
Yeah.
It's also important to know that Justin Belson is a kind of semi-troubled young person who was dating and in love with Molly Hecht, and then they fell apart when Molly Hecht got too involved in drugs. And that's that. So we're at the memorial service for Regina. It feels mean to say her name that way now that she's passed, actually.
I always said it the right way.
There's no right way, just to be clear.
There is. The writers of this book intended for it to be Regina. The writers of this book were not Canadian.
Oh, so we're obsessed with authorial intent now? It's just like what the... Okay.
Yes, we are.
Okay. So we're at the memorial service for Regina. May her memory be for a blessing. Justin gets up to leave. Molly Hecht is sitting by herself, watching. She wanted so badly to speak to Justin. They hadn't talked once since the whole tragedy had taken place. Screwing up her courage, Molly crossed the room and put her hand on Justin's shoulder. Justin, she said in a low voice. He looked down at her in silence, then pulled away from her touch. Please, Justin, we need to talk. But Justin wouldn't listen to her. He jerked away as if her touch had burned him. And without a backward glance, he turned and hurried down the crowded corridor. Will anyone in Sweet Valley ever talk to Molly Hecht again? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 41, Outcast.
I do think we maybe need to explain the dynamic between the three of them a little bit more, because like we didn't. So Regina, when she finds out that her boyfriend Bruce has been cheating on her with this girl Amy and that everybody knew about it, there's this big moment at the Wakefields and she like yells at everyone. And she's also frustrated with her family because she feels everyone's like being patronizing to her. And in this alienation, she becomes like, starts to be close friends, and like it's sort of like a, is it romantic or not, but ends up just being friends with this guy Justin, who, as Robert said, is considered to the mainstream kids that we're friends with bad crowd
that we're friends with.
Yeah, but he's sort of in between, and we talked about the fractal and the boundaries of like who's really the bad crowd, because like from his perspective he's setting his own boundaries, which is this girl Molly, who he dated and really loves still. He broke up with her because he felt like whatever she was doing was crossing a boundary that was too much for him, which is she not only was doing coke, she was potentially going to maybe do heroin, or he was worried about it and he's like, this is getting too crazy for me, whatever. And then there's the really quote unquote bad girl named Jan Brown, and then there's the really 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 bad person, which is Buzz, which is the drug dealer. And like this happened at Molly's house. Buzz brought the cocaine. A lot of them, I think, pressured her. Jan physically held her head down and said, snort it at one point. She snorted one line before that, and then Jan did that the second time, I think. And Justin was sort of there, and Regina was uncomfortable, and he didn't help her leave early enough because he was like trying to protect Molly, whatever. But part of the reason I laid that out is to give context, but the other part of the reason I lay it out is because like, as we're saying this, it makes me think like, why wasn't this book called Outcasts? And why wasn't Justin an outcast? Like, it was just Molly's house. It wasn't her coke. Yeah, it was her house that the party happened at, but like Jan was the one actually vocally pressuring her. Justin was the one who brought her there and like didn't help her leave when she wanted to. And Buzz is the actual Coke owner, whatever, which of course blame's going on him. And of course, part of the way Justin is like getting himself quote unquote clean from this is by rejecting Molly when she tries to connect with him after all of it to keep himself away from her so he doesn't catch the contagion of the stigma. But it's like, why is it just taken for granted that this book is about Molly? Why it is, you'll see she's on the cover. Why is it called Outcast? And like, how come he didn't get outcast? If anything, he was the one who had some loyalty to Regina of like being friends with her. And then let alone we can get to all the other responsibilities, maybe the other kids at Sweet Valley and Liz and Bruce and Amy and Jess and everyone else. But why?
I think part of it is like very few people were at the party. So they don't know that they haven't read the book, of course. They will read the book later, but they don't know, for example, that Jan held her head down. They maybe know that Buzz is a bad guy, but he was already like a pre-outcast by being a drug dealer. So like they don't really have a place for their blame except for on Molly, because they don't know.
But they do on Justin. They do know that Justin's the one who introduced her to this crowd. Word would get out pretty quick that, like, yeah, Justin brought her to this party. That's pretty.
I think that's kind of damning. I can see that. I think part of why we blame Justin is that Regina kept saying, I want to leave, let's leave. Whereas none of Regina's friends, like they wouldn't know that.
I'm just like thinking of all the fucking people in this book. Molly actually did the least. Like she has the least responsibility in this. The only thing that happened was it was her house. I don't think she pressured Regina. I think it was only Jan and other kids. Like did she ever say, there was so much of her being quiet in the last book. Like, what did she, I almost think we should go back to the last book and find like, what did she literally actually say or do besides it being her house?
Molly does say, Regina, you don't know what you're missing. Coke is absolutely fantastic. You take one snort and all of a sudden nothing matters. You forget about school, about your family, about all your problems. You just feel terrific.
I forgot about that.
Molly giggles, a high taunting giggle. Molly has very good giggle control, which is impressive.
What's a taunting giggle? I mean, this is like the sparkle in Regina's eye that told us she didn't take things for granted. May her memory be a blessing. But a taunting giggle, what is that? Like, it's like Woody Woodpecker.
No.
Is that Woody Woodpecker?
That is Woody Woodpecker, but what we've done is not a taunting giggle.
What is it?
It's something offensive. Molly says, go for it, Regina. You're about to have the time of your life. Fine. Have her do another line. Sometimes you don't feel anything the first time. Have her do another line. Molly said again. Her voice sounded like iron.
Anyhow, all right, I understand. Still, my point stands.
I mean, it does and it doesn't. It does.
And it doesn't. All right. I guess plot summary, right? Yeah, plot summary. Which one do you prefer?
I'd much prefer the B plot, but which one do you prefer?
I prefer the B plot and I graciously accept the A plot.
As always, you are playing backgammon while I am playing checkers. Like you are always 6 steps ahead. Jessica feels like she needs to do something to remember Regina, and she's not sure what, and then she remembers the scholarship that Liz won and then turned down to go to Switzerland.
The Margaret Stern Memorial Scholarship. Yeah.
The Margaret Stern Memorial Scholarship. And Jessica has this lightning bolt idea, like, what if we did a memorial scholarship for Regina? We could give it to a student who has overcome some hardship or handicap, the way that Regina did. PBA can raise money for it. That's Pi Beta Alpha, how embarrassing. Pi Beta Alpha, which is a sorority of which she is president. And she basically figures out this whole thing. Everybody is super, super interested. She briefly gets stressed about like, how do we manage the money? And we get to see Jessica as high-powered businesswoman, and I think she would excel. And then Demon Ned comes in and is like, I see that you're growing and you could become a strong, powerful woman. So instead, I'm going to paternalize and ruin. And he's like, oh, I'll handle the money stuff. You just worry about raising the money. I'll invest it and do all of the trust stuff. And they set up the scholarship, and it's great. They're going to have a dance marathon. God, I hope we get to see that dance marathon.
No comment.
Wait, no comment good or no comment bad?
To say good or bad would negate the very premise of what it is to have no comment.
I know. I want there to be a dance marathon so bad that I'd be okay if you spoiled it for me. No, don't tell me. Don't tell me. No comment. No comment. No comment.
So the A plot is, as we were saying, it's the fallout of all the blaming, guilt, and grief, and everyone's kind of processing. And in all of this, as we said, like Molly has been cast out. There has been a big stigma and blame put on her, and she's being completely isolated. At home, this is reinforced. Her parents' reaction to all of this has been to reinforce that blame, and they are really quite harsh with her. And no one is showing her any compassion, let alone any kind of acknowledgement of the grief that she's experiencing. And then, similar to how in Regina's alienation, we saw her like go to Justin and like go to cocaine as an escape and a solution. Molly's way of coping is to go to Buzz, the coke dealer from the previous book, who is like basically evading the cops in this book, and they're looking for him, quote unquote. So he's sort of like on the low, but he's in a very manipulative way because he is trying to get money from her to fund his being a fugitive. He like is manipulatively like showing her compassion and validation, and it feels to her like he's the only one she can go to, and she doesn't have any other choices. And so she is like going with him and like drinking and smoking weed and thinking about like running away with him potentially to Mexico. Meanwhile, in the context of everyone's like processing of stuff, Elizabeth has a journey from blaming Molly and rebuffing her attempts to connect with her to realizing that people are being too mean to her and like she deserves compassion. And so she basically recruits Justin. Initially, he doesn't want to because he's dealing with his own shit, whatever. But ultimately, he realizes they do need to help her out. And there ends up being some just chaos where they chase after them, similar to Runaway. They like see her getting into a car with him and they're going, and then they follow them after she saw her at the bank. And then in a dramatic moment, they stop them and he has a knife, and then Justin throws him to the ground, and then the police come. And then in the end, everything's okay. Mr. Collins is going to talk to Molly's parents about being nicer to her. Elizabeth tells all the kids at school it's not her fault. And it ends with Molly actually like in the Oracle office being like, it's kind of nice in here. And then being like, I'm going to get clean. And I actually might even apply for that scholarship next year. And Elizabeth says, I think that's great. And I think the Moros, like the family and everyone, would actually think it's nice for you to have that if you do like overcome your challenges with drugs and everything. I think that would be awesome. And like you should go for it, which I thought was a really, really special moment. And that's the A plot.
And it looks like does Molly show some interest in maybe writing for the Oracle?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exciting.
Taglines?
Will anyone ever talk to Molly again?
Literally, yes. Will anyone ever speak to Molly Hecht again? I mean, that was the cliffhanger.
Yeah. And on the back, it's I wish it were the tragic aftermath, ... But it's not. I wish it were alone in the crowd, ... I'm not even close.
No one to turn to, ...
Oh, but she does,
Yeah.
of course. She has famously Buzz.
Oh, the cover. Okay.
Please.
This one's funny. I'm sorry, but it is.
So first off, it looks very 70s. The hair feels very feathered in kind of a 70s Farrah Fawcett-y way. But we've got a lot of taupe and beige. And everyone looks in their 40s.
It's so weird. I totally agree with you. It's so 70s looking. There's this like whitewash over it. Everything's sort of gray. It's so weird.
It's
And
really
who are these
weird.
two random girls? Remember when you said Mr. Stern would be on the cover and Leaving Home, and I was like, Mr. Stern would never be on the cover. Meanwhile, these girls, we literally don't even know who they are, which is actually different than a Mr. Stern because they're almost just, they're extras, whereas Mr. Stern is a minor character. So it's like they're more just background kind of randoms, but it's weird.
So in the foreground, we have Molly Hecht wearing like a striped blouse that does have kind of prison undertones. And I wonder, is this a commentary on the ways her parents are keeping her locked up in her home? Is this a commentary on the way that she feels imprisoned by her own loneliness and isolation? Who knows? She's looking down. She looks a little like Heather Locklear.
She wishes, but yeah, the hair.
I mean, yeah, we all wish. We all wish we looked like Heather Locklear, but she wishes. And in the back, we just have two nameless not faceless, but might as well be faceless,
Literally.
40-year-old women who are performatively gossiping about Molly.
It's just weird that like her hair and Molly's hair are both this weird gray, and the other girl's hair is brown, but it's sort of gray too. And it's like everything's just sort of white and gray, and their weird pale skin is all. It's like their skin, their hair, and their shirts are all sort of gray. It's like you almost want to think he was walking over to like deliver his artwork, and then like it started raining, and the raining just sort of like washed away the color or something. Would you like to take us to the engine that?
Elizabeth
Wow.
Wakefield wiped her eyes with a tissue. Her hand was trembling with emotion. She and her boyfriend, Jeffrey French, moved slowly toward the door of the auditorium of Sweet Valley Heights. The crowd filed out. All around her were the sounds of muffled crying, heart-wrenching tears of grief like the ones Elizabeth had been shedding since the night her friend Regina Morrow had died. Nicholas Morrow, a hot brother of Regina, had asked her to speak at the service. She managed not to cry as she spoke, but as soon as she was off stage, she begun crying again. Now her throat ached and her chin quivered uncontrollably as a sob welled up to the surface again. Pressing her fist against her mouth, Elizabeth looked up into Geoffrey's deep green eyes. He had been crying too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The pain of Regina's tragic death went too deep for words. Then Geoffrey tenderly brushed a lock of honey gold hair from Elizabeth's forehead and gave her a faint, pained smile.
The only thing I have to say is that we start with Elizabeth's, her visible display, her mourning. Her mourning and her experience of grieving Regina is public, it is recognized, it is validated, and it is visible. And that's what this book, exactly. That's what this book starts with, you know? It's just a contrast. She is one of the like public, seen as legit representatives of the bereaved, you know?
At the end of the last book, we have this big reveal that Regina has written Liz a letter and mailed it, and Liz got it after Regina's death, and it basically said, "Hey, Liz, you're always right. I was wrong. I forgive you. I don't blame Bruce. I don't blame Amy. You can't steal someone. Like, if Bruce and I were really in love and happy, we would be fine. I absolve everyone of all guilt and blame."
To be clear, the thing she like would have blamed her for would have been the like knowing that something in the milk ain't clean with Bruce and letting her show up to the barbecue like none the wiser. And then Jess says, "I wish it was just a bad dream." I was thinking, remember in the last book when I think it was Enid or Liz or someone was like, "It feels like it's a bad dream," or "I wish it was a bad," or "Are you sure it's not a bad dream?" And it wasn't. I think we didn't realize this at the time, but I'm like, that was a signal to the reader, hey, this isn't Winter Carnival. Because like we have read books before where someone randomly who we really care about dies, and like it looked pretty similar to this, like sad scene at the hospital and comforting each other. It's so them saying like, "I can't believe it's not a dream," is I think telling us, just so you know.
Attention.
Yeah. Then they have like this family conference, which is kind of interesting. So they've just come home from the memorial. The Wakefield parents like gather them all in Stephen's home.
I was really interested in the way that they approached it as like we see that Regina was doing drugs because she thought that was the only answer and she didn't have anyone to turn to. And I want you to know you can always turn to us. And I actually kind of found it sweet or sentimental or something that they're like, not like, there's one reading that's just like, Regina became a bad girl and she did drugs. Don't become a bad girl and don't do drugs. Just say no. And instead, this feels like a much more humane understanding of like why people do drugs and why some people do some drugs in the first place, and what a parent could actually do to intervene. And like saying like, I'm here to talk. When you feel like you have nowhere to turn, you can always turn to me. It would be beautiful if this were supported by any good parenting in any of the previous 40 books, but you know.
You're right. You're right, though. Like, they actually are being really good in this conversation. They're being good in the sense of saying, like, we're here for you and you don't have to be scared. Also, if you are in a situation or whatever. But then they're also, like, I think being good about the... Alice says she might have felt betrayed and alone, but she did have other options. And then Jessica says, well, she wouldn't have done it if Molly hadn't made her. It's all her fault. And Ned says, no, it wasn't. It may have been her party. Molly may have given Regina a push, but it was Regina who held out her hand for the drugs. It was her decision. And then Ned says, you're probably thinking, why her? Why her? It could have been anyone. Anyone at all who used cocaine or heroin or any other drug or even liquor. She took a chance and we all lost because of it.
It's like backgammon.
I have a
you roll and you leave your piece unprotected. You take a chance. Sometimes we all lose because of it, but sometimes you don't.
when we roll the dice, there's a reason why the singular for dice is actually being dead.
That's so true.
Okay? Because
It's
that's
so
the chance you
scary.
take.
It's haunting. Well, were you going to say something else about backgammon?
Oh, well, no, I was just about the book, and I'm so sorry to bring it back to the book. Jessica then brings up her desire to do something in honor of Regina, and Alice says, well, it's nice to remember her. But I just had a quick comment about Jessica and this legacy project or whatever, the scholarship, which is lovely. Why does Jessica start thinking? What sparks this for her? It's the question of blame and responsibility, right? The parents are lifting some of the blame off Molly. What that implicitly does, it's like everyone wants to put the blame on someone so they don't have to look at their own responsibility, right? Because everyone played some small role, including, of course, Regina, who played the biggest role because she made the decision, right? But a lot of this book is people trying to avoid reflecting on their role in this. And I think Jessica's engagement with this is completely unarticulated, but it's never said explicitly that she feels guilt. But I think there's hints at it that motivates the scholarship, which is great. It's a good thing. Because we must ask ourselves, why is Jessica so strongly against Molly, right? Jessica is consistently the one in conversation who's like, it was Molly, she's bad. She has to be an outcast. We can't talk to her, like over and over again, right? And when Jessica, same like when Liz has that reaction, we often ask ourselves why. And so she brings it's all her fault. The parents explain why it's not all her fault. And then she thinks, I feel bad. She says, I wasn't always that nice to Regina. I can't think of any
Me neither.
example to that, except in this Amy and Bruce thing. Jessica and Liz had the conversation with the barbecue, and Jessica said, like, I live for the drama and I can't wait for this. And let's invite both of them. And she says, happy couples are boring, whatever. And Jessica said she was excited for the drama that was going to ensue, and she knew it was happening. She also had a funny feeling that she couldn't say why when she saw Regina and Justin together. And so she, I think, in some ways is grappling with what, if any, role does she play? And she doesn't necessarily say it, but I think her doing this legacy thing as a way to take some action is very beautiful. But then the sort of less beautiful way that she's dealing with that is by the scapegoating of Molly.
The discussions of blame and the way they talk about whose fault it was. Have you seen Into the Woods, the musical by Stephen Sondheim?
No, I haven't.
Okay, because there's this whole the first act is all fairy tales and they're woven together, and then everybody gets their happily ever after, and then the second act is like, how do you deal with happily ever after when you're actually not as happy as you are, and like everything goes to shit. And there's this whole song called Your Fault where they're like trying to figure out who's to blame. And it just really felt like it captures so much of the same emotions. It's because of you, there's a giant in our midst, and my wife is dead. But it isn't my fault. I was given those beans. You persuaded me to trade away my cow for beans, and without those beans, there'd been no stock to get up to the giants in the first place. Were they worthless beans? Were they oversold? Oh, and tell us who persuaded you to steal that gold. See, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. No, yes, it is. It's not true. And they're like all of these, you'll cut all of that, obviously. But all of these characters are kind of bickering back and forth about whose fault it is because no one really wants to take on the idea that it could be everybody's fault, kind of.
And because anger sits on top of despair and grief. Remember when it's like that other reference that we brought up that time, the movie Open Water, where the scuba divers get left to get eaten by sharks and they end up being dead together in the water because the scuba people forget about them because they counted wrong on their list. And it was when Jessica was in the woods with Scott and all night long, and she was thinking, oh, well, if Elizabeth should have made me be a Girl Scout, so she would maybe be a Girl Scout. And it's that thing of also when you're in a panic situation or a situation that's too scary or too awful to process, it's like you do that instead, maybe.
That makes perfect sense to me. We get this idea that we're trying to place blame. This time it's Lila and Kara and Jess talking about whose fault it is. They're wondering if the police have caught Buzz. We learn that even Lila's dad is anti-cop. Are you kidding? Lila snorted. My father says the police in this town are worthless when it comes to that sort of thing.
I thought it was weird that, like, you would think that the police, there would be so much public and political pressure on them to like get this guy because the Moros are so rich and famous in the town
Yeah.
that like the fact that the police can't track this guy down literally in the parking lot of Kelly's is just weird.
It's very, very strange. I mean, he'd be able to be found.
They also got to the house before the ambulance did, so like why couldn't they get him then? Like what, he ran out the window? Like what are you he's like whatever.
We get some interiority from Justin and how sad he is. Molly tries to talk to Justin, and Justin draws like the firmest line he possibly can. He says, I'm going to take a clean start. Just try to pretend like you never knew those people, never hung out with them, never liked any of them, especially not Molly Hecht.
He also says he's doing it for Regina's sake. He says for his father's sake, his father who's dead, and for Regina's sake, he's going to leave that crowd behind him. So it's like he feels like he owes it to Regina to abandon Molly or to not, you know?
Yeah. And then we get some of Molly's interiority and the idea that she deserves to feel bad. She feels like it's all her fault. And then she has this voice in her head that says, but are you the only one to blame? What about Bruce and Amy? What about Justin and Buzz and Jan? What about Regina herself? Am I the only one responsible? Am I the only one who's going to be a social outcast from now on? And we get back to this question that you raised at the beginning of the text, like, why is it outcasts and not outcasts?
It's so sad. She's trying not to cry, thinking to herself, I can't do this alone. I can't do this alone. And everyone is looking away from her, so she's contagious.
Mm-hmm. By the end of the day, she feels like she's been physically beaten.
And then she's like not even looking forward to going home because she knows that will find no relief at home. And then we get to the parents and they're so mean.
And what's interesting is her parents are divorced, and her dad has come down from San Francisco to stay at the house, basically just to more effectively punish Molly. And Molly,
I guess they're being like, well, I guess she doesn't have enough supervision, so we need more supervision or something.
But I mean, like, this whole thing happened, if we're thinking about blame, like, Molly's mom left her home alone.
I think high school juniors are allowed to be left alone. They're 16.
I don't
She
know.
can't be left alone. No, I'm with Molly's mom.
Of course you are.
You think a 16-year-old child can't be left alone in Sweet Valley?
You're just happy that Regina's dead, and I'm not. And so we're processing it in different ways.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just saying what the listeners are thinking. Molly's like, could I transfer schools? Everything is so hard here. And her dad is like, no, fuck you. Your life is going to really, really be bad. And that's what you deserve. Pardo suggested that we skip all of the PBA and the planning and the scholarship. And I think you're definitely right. The one thing I do want to highlight before we skip all of it is Jessica is aware of the misogyny within the school and the school hierarchy, and the idea that PBA wasn't taken seriously. As much as she loved being president of the sorority, she could admit to herself that the group wasn't always taken seriously as the science club or the newspaper or the youth and government groups were. And I think she's like putting her finger on the fact that like this is women's things and therefore our society isn't valuing it. I just love that she realized that.
I mean, her knowing that they're not taken seriously isn't necessarily her doing that analysis. I would love to think it is. I don't know if that's there in the text. I think we both could be right.
I love that we're both right. I also love that Susan Stewart, who we barely knew except that she was mysterious and had some weird mom that we didn't know about, who we always knew who the mom was. She gets one line in this book. They're talking about planning how they're going to raise money. And Susan Stewart says, and I can get my hands on a lot of movies that we can charge admissions for, added Susan Stewart, whose father was a famous film director. And it's like, what does she think is happening? Like, she thinks she's going to get like unreleased movies? Or she thinks she's, I just didn't know.
Gonna pirate them?
From her dad?
That's not okay. Also, like,
Regina wouldn't want that.
Only Susan Stewart, like, gets one line in the book and makes sure she has to mention her fucking famous film director. And who's her mother? A waitress. Never forget her mother's a waitress, which we think is fine. But Susan has a problem with. One more thing. The same way Susan got one line, Suzanne Hamlin.
I know. That was weird too.
Also got one line that was like, but Jess, well, what about all the administrative work? I'm like, but I like it. I like seeing them pop up.
I guess
it makes me feel safe. It makes me feel safe to remember that this universe is consistent, you know?
I agree. I do wish that Susan had also said, like, I could get my hands on a lot of movies, or maybe my mom could donate her tips, or we could have a pancake breakfast that my mom could be the waitress at. But no.
Right. Just one more comment about the scholarship.
Sure.
It's really funny that like the Morrows are super, 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 super wealthy, and like it doesn't really. I'm not saying whatever, but like it doesn't necessarily occur to anyone that like the Morrows might want to fund something like this, and like
Oh,
that's how that would
yeah.
happen. Because I'm like, yeah, they're gonna do their bake sales, their car washes, their dance-a-thons, and like it's a great idea. Like yes, but it's like the fact that this girl came from the richest, one of the richest. I know we don't want to be litigated by the Patman estate, but one of the richest families in town. We do know they have the biggest mansion in town.
But it's so humble.
I know it's so humble. It's so humble and they're so low key. So Liz and Jeffrey are talking about Liz says everywhere I go, I keep thinking I see Regina. I turn a corner and I see someone with black hair and I think it's Regina, gotta catch up with her. And then I say, you idiot, it isn't Regina, but I keep still expecting to see her and I can't get used to her being gone. And this is something that is very common, is experiencing the presence of the deceased after they die. And this can be experienced by people either as fine or as distressing. And it should not be pathologized. It's very common. And I thought it was really sweet. And I enjoyed seeing Elizabeth try to like work through her grief and get support from Jeffrey about through her grief by sharing this poem with him. Because like after Nicholas had read the Edna St. Vincent Millay poem at the memorial, Liz was like, oh, I remembered how I love her poetry. And she like read all her poems, then found one that's like to a romantic love, but says that it's how she feels about Regina. I don't know. It was interesting to see like in her process, she's finding meaning and finding different ways of expressing and dealing with her feelings. And she reads this poem that basically has to do with time isn't making it better and it's still hurting just as much. And when I go places that there's like things that remind me of you, it hurts then. And when I go places that have nothing reminding of you, I'm still thinking of you. So I can't escape it and it's not getting better. And that's how hard it is. And it's very, and then they have a nice conversation about, well, we keep her memory. We keep her memory alive, and it's very nice, I thought. That's it.
I think it's beautiful. Edna St. Vincent Millay, of course, famous bisexual poet.
Oh my gosh, love.
Queer icon.
All right, chapter 4. Molly tries to talk to Liz. She is rejected.
Bad.
She feels totally alone. So where does she go? She goes to the cemetery. We get this interesting moment where she recalls that at the party before everything went down, she and Regina had a moment of eye contact where she felt like they connected and could be friends and had this like momentary like understanding, which in the previous book, we saw Regina's version of it and she felt the exact same thing. And so we see that mirrored here. And so Molly wants to go to the cemetery, whether she wants to talk to the grave or wants some sort of forgiveness or whatever it is, she wants to somehow be in that space and connect to Regina or connect to her grief or her guilt or whatever in this way. And unfortunately, she gets there and actually Nicholas is there and he is
hot.
He is
Handsome.
weeping. He's weeping over the grave site and he's, why did you leave me? Why did you leave me alone? And his pain is so powerful. And Molly's sort of seeing this and feeling guilty. And then he catches her and he says like, how dare you come here? And then he yells at her, you killed her, you killed her, you killed my sister.
It's such a beautiful commentary on the relationship between kind of disenfranchised grief and enfranchised grief, or like who's a sanctioned mourner and who's not. Like they both show up to do the exact same thing, and Nicholas feels completely justified to be like, no, you get out of here.
I could understand him not feeling gracious about her being there. I could understand him being emotional and everything else, but when he says you killed my sister, you killed her. And again, it's both and. Like at once I feel for him, when we've said similar things about Stephen when he was grieving, and like we can be compassionate. What he's feeling is extremely difficult and very, very intense grief. And, this person, he is at minimum uncomfortable with her being around. And I could understand that he's lacking control of his emotions, but it doesn't make it okay to say to someone, like, it's really not okay that he said to her, you killed her. It's really, really horrible that he said that. And he later realizes he never actually apologizes. He tells Liz to apologize for him and then whatever. But like, I don't know. My heart broke for both of them.
Yeah, and it's just, I do feel like I can totally understand Nicholas just has so many emotions and he needs to put them somewhere and he needs to have there needs to be some logic here. And so he needs to have someone to blame. And so he says, you killed my sister. You killed her.
By putting the blame on Molly, Regina gets to be absolved. And like
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to then deal with the question of like why did Regina do it if it was her responsibility? Like that's something that's hard to grapple with, right? Of like how do you ask that question when someone's dead? It's like you're trying to put blame on someone in their own death. Like that doesn't feel good. So then how do I make sense of it? It's very, very hard.
Molly goes home somehow. She gets a call. And Buzz, it's interesting the way that Buzz approaches this. He basically is like, look, I know what it's like. People are blaming me too, but it's not us. She had her own free will. And Molly is just so desperate for someone to say something to her that she's like, yep, you're right. It was her choice. Let's keep moving. And he keeps saying, like, this is really bad for you, but no one's really understanding that. And she's agreeing with him. She hears a voice inside her head that says, his words ring false, but she ignores it because she needed comfort. And Buzz was giving it freely. I thought the use of the word freely was very interesting. And they arranged to meet up at Kelly's.
And then we get his interiority, which is like, well, she's sure going to come in handy when I have to split town. I'm being sneaky one.
And what's weird is he's like, I really need some money fast. The best way to get it is by ripping off Molly Hecht, this high school girl that I don't know if she has money or not. Buzz is a literal drug dealer. Why wouldn't he just deal some drugs?
I would think he would have more money than her in her savings account or whatever. I guess he's bad at his job.
Yeah, he must be bad at job.
It sounds like he's kind of giving away a lot of it. I don't know. I don't understand his sales strategy. All right. Jessica's overwhelmed by paperwork. Liz undermines her and laughs at her trying to sort of deal with all the dollars and cents of the scholarship. And then we get Chinese food. And the mom has brought home Chinese food and they all eat it on the patio. And no one says anything about Ned being allergic or having a stomach problem or can't tolerate it or whatever his sort of supposed Chinese food intolerance issue is.
He's literally popping a chunk of water chestnut into his gullet with chopsticks. Yeah. When we got to this scene, I was like, oh shit, this is going to be half of the podcast tomorrow.
Well, I'm just saying, like, now we've, like Camille Grammer, and now we've said it because it's that gif I send you a lot of time, and now we said it.
Yeah, I think you only said it once, and I didn't totally understand it.
Oh, it's about something that's actually very, 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 very dark. I don't want to get to it unless you want me to, but then I'd love to. But, so now we've documented it. We've had him literally eat it. And again, Jan Brown's not here pushing his head into the chopsticks, okay? He's eating it of his free will. So there's that. Case closed.
But now we said it, okay?
And then Ned tells Jessica that he's happy to sort of manage this trust and deal with all the money shit that has to do with the scholarship. And Liz is like, what? And Liz seems like sort of annoyed.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe wanted Jess to fail, I think, in this a little bit. And then Jess gets a fortune cookie that says it's a good day to make plans.
I thought that was sweet.
And then Jeffrey comes over and he's like, why didn't you save me a spare rib?
But he's in a fake whiny tone and he's nudging her in her ribs. And I was like, is this dirty talk?
I don't know about that.
Could have saved me a spare rib, he says as he touches her ribs. I don't know what straight people do.
Not rib play.
Okay. This isn't like an Army Hammer moment.
Oh.
Too dark?
Yeah, actually.
Sorry.
I only like mortuary cannibalism because it's part of the group cultural belief and like when you die it's gonna happen. And like no one does that anymore anyway. Okay. Liz is talking to Jeffrey. She feels guilty about Molly. She said, and they decide she's gonna call Justin and try to recruit Justin to help out, and he says no. Then Molly's with Buzz at Kelly's, and she goes in and gets some beers to bring out to him since he can't show his face, and she hears everyone talking about laughing at how Buzz is trying to evade the cops. And she thinks to herself, it doesn't matter who he is. He's giving me warmth that I haven't had or something like this. And she smokes weed to escape. And he's being very, very manipulative of her and she says, okay, I'll take some money out of my savings account for my college fund.
I know you hate to throw these kinds of terms around. Is he love bombing her? The way that he's like, I feel like I've known you all my life. I've never felt this way about anyone. I really mean it. They kiss. Molly, baby, no one understands you like I do.
I don't know if the word love, I mean, it seems like something like that. Certainly it's very manipulative and he's lying.
Yeah.
Certainly we can agree on that. He's lying to get something from her.
And then my 6-word review was, this is just like Runaway, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, oh, sorry, Runaway is famously the book where Jess recognizes that no one distinguishes her from her sister, and she feels all sorts of feelings about that, and no one pays attention to her, and everyone's being super shitty to her. And she's like, if I leave, or if I even threaten to leave, then they'll realize how much they miss me. And Buzz literally says, listen, when the people here know you're gone, they're going to realize what a big mistake they made treating you so bad. They'll be so sorry they ever dumped on you this way. They'll be begging you to come home, believe me. And it feels like he is making verbal what Jess was kind of going through in Runaway as well.
And he's like telling Molly, like, I'm not only offering you this sort of temporary escape or band-aid. By doing this, you'll actually fix your family problems and get the thing you actually want back of like support. I mean, I do think one of the big differences between this and Runaway is like Buzz is an unkind and evil person. Like in Runaway, we had Nikki Shepherd, who was a little bit misguided, but I think he was essentially a kind and genuine person of like, he cared about Jess and like he was being genuine with her. Whereas like Buzz is completely manipulative. He doesn't seem to have any compassion for what happened with Regina. Not that it's his fault or whatever, but like everyone else, he plays a role and is involved in this. And like, he doesn't seem to have a empathy or feeling remorse for stuff.
And through all of this, we see that Molly keeps being like, ugh, I don't know. She experiences indecision. She wishes she didn't have to choose. She could take it all back now. This was a moment of truth. And she just feels like she's going through the motions of doing this, but she senses in her heart this isn't right. Next morning, Nicholas Morrow comes over and wants to talk to Liz, and he basically feels really, really bad for what he did. And he and Liz have this kind of weird interaction where he's like, I was really bad. I really feel bad about it. I couldn't stop myself. I just totally lost control. And Liz has empathy and is like, I know what you mean. I guess we're all looking for someone to take our anger and sadness out on. And then it's clear to Liz that Nicholas has come over to ask something, but he won't ask it. And she goes, what did you... She began hesitantly. Nicholas gave her a rueful smile. You think I want you to take care of it for me, right? Clean up after my stupid blunder? And Elizabeth goes, no, and Nicholas interrupts her. I just thought if you see Molly today in school, you might tell her I'm sorry. If I can track her down, I'll apologize myself, but for the time being, ... And I just thought this interaction was so weird. It feels really manipulative that he is asking her to do something without actually asking it. The way he says, you think I want you to take care of it, right? Clean up after my stupid blunder. He does want her to take care of it.
It's even worse than what you're saying, I think, because what he's doing is he's not only is he asking without asking, because then even when he does ask, he doesn't ask. He says, I just thought if you see her, you might tell her I'm sorry. He's still not making a request. But even more, what he's doing is he's putting her on the defensive and potentially criticizing her for supposedly, by her doing nothing, suspecting him of doing the thing he's about to do. It's like, what? It's very manipulative.
I want to have so much empathy for this young, hot man who has just lost his sister. But some of this stuff is just like, he's a snake. Like, that's snake behavior.
It's also hilarious that it says, Nicholas was working for a year in his father's computer business before going to college, and as a result, he had very little contact with most of the Sweet Valley High crowd. I said, ha, 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 ha. He's at every party every weekend. Yeah. Please, give me a break.
The only person who has less contact with the Sweet Valley High crowd is her brother Stephen.
That's right. The Dybbuk.
The dibs.
So they agree that they and others have been too harsh on Molly and that she needs some help. And Liz is like, I'll see what I can do. Don't worry about it. I got you.
And then Liz is kind of thinking through what she should do. And she's confused about what she should do, if anything.
Nicholas hadn't exactly put her in a great position. No, he hadn't.
I'd let him put me in some bad positions. You know what I mean? This idea of Elizabeth's indecision, like, what should I do? Should I do anything? And so it's like she's unclear what to do. She sees Molly and thinks now's your chance. And then she's like, nah, surely she'll see her later. She ached to do something, but she just didn't feel she knew Molly well enough to reach out to her. It's like, oh, you know her well enough to snap at her, but not well enough to reach out to her.
It's like when Winston went to Mr. Oliver's house and then realized Mr. Oliver didn't know that he had won and was like, okay, now I can wait longer. It's like, just because we need more time to heighten and make the book be long. And so then later she can like really realize it, and then there's more urgency when her and Justin have to chase them, you know?
That is definitely part of it. So we've got this indecision, this inability to make any kind of movement. What? You're laughing at me. This
I know you too well. It's just that's the problem. I know you too well. I
this
know
is-
the garden path you're taking us down.
It's
I'm
so
here.
classic.
And I'm walking on the path with you. But continue. Please take us down.
Okay. So she's frozen. What can she do? So much indecision, her conscience, her morality. What's the right choice?
Certainly the first character in literature to face such a scenario. Mustn't it be, Robert? Mustn't it be?
This must be the start of modern literature, because it is a character who is plagued with guilt and conscience and what do I do in indecision. And then we flip the page, chapter 8. Justin scowled at the blank notebook open in front of him. 5 pages on Hamlet's soliloquy, due the day after tomorrow, and he hadn't even started. And we see, of course, the resonances between Hamlet, some people feel history's first modern character, and Elizabeth and Nicholas and Justin himself. This kind of indecision, what's the right way, what's the wrong... I just like, bravo, Kate Willem, weaving in, putting this text in conversation with Hamlet. Some people feel a lesser text than this text, but still a conversation that's worth having. Truly beautiful.
It must be said, Hamlet ripped off this book.
Yeah. I mean, we're all thinking it. You might as well verbalize it. Now we've said it, as Cecile Grammer would say.
You're funny.
I mean, I'm funny, but I'm also like, what? It's Camille Grammer?
Yeah.
Okay. Cecile's a great name, too. Don't want to give that short shrift.
Tina, shut up.
Hey, that's my wife you're talking about.
That's not what you said at the iced tea store.
Oh.
I appreciate your discussion of Hamlet. Many of us love to call him our big first modern something. And what I was thinking with it was actually comparisons to, I didn't think of the comparison to Liz, which so beautifully you thread together from the end of the last chapter. I was thinking of comparisons more to Regina and to Molly, because it's like Hamlet is saying the famous, to be being or to be not exactly being, actually. And what he's actually talking about is being what is actually being alive or being dead. And the question of like, would you rather like be being alive or being dead? The whole thing of this soliloquy is that like it is a soliloquy, but he's actually not alone. He is speaking it as a soliloquy, believing himself to be alone, and yet who waits in the wings? And who is seeing him and yet is remaining unseen but Ophelia, Claudius, and Polonius? And that made me think of both Regina and Molly, because with Regina, it's like, as Mrs. Wakefield said, or Mr. Wakefield said, she felt alone, but she did have options. Like there were actually people there for her, Right. And with Molly, she's feeling completely alone, and actually, for most of the book, she is completely alone. Thankfully, now Elizabeth and Justin are becoming actually they're the ones who are waiting in the wings and who are seeing her without being seen, and at the end they're going to be seen by her, and she's going to realize she wasn't just speaking to the air like so much of a Hamlet.
I love that. Is beautiful and brilliant.
Liz convinces Justin we gotta help her.
She makes a deal that she'll help with the Hamlet essay if he helps with the Molly situation.
Which she's like, I didn't ask for your help, but okay.
Yeah.
Just funny line.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, first of all, just I did think it was funny that like so earlier when Jess told Nicholas about the scholarship idea, he was like, yeah, I love it. It's so nice. My family will really appreciate it. And I did love that she sort of like took it as an opportunity to like flirt with him. And then now Jess is telling Lila, like, so yeah, Nicholas thought it was such a great idea. Who knows? Like maybe I could get together with him, whatever. And then Lila goes, you know perfectly well he was just being polite. He doesn't mean anything by it. People with breeding are always very gallant.
I
That
read
was
that
funny.
line out loud to Martin because I'm a huge Lila head and I just love the things that she says.
Mhm.
And Martin goes, "Did Granny say that?" I was like, no, but that does seem like the kind of thing my grandmother would say. People with breeding are always very gallant.
That's really funny.
And then, of course, we get shoehorned in the plot for the next book.
Our first interracial relationship.
I mean, yeah. Lila's gossiping. She says, I saw Sandy Bacon with that guy Manuel Lopez, and they looked pretty friendly, let me tell you. Manuel Lopez, that Mexican guy? He's a senior, isn't he? The point is, Sandy's parents are really prejudiced. Remember how embarrassed she was when her father wrote that letter to the editor of Sweet Valley News about how the town was being overrun by immigrants? He's a real bigot. I thought this is going to be, I'm like nervous and interested in what the next book will hold. Because I was like, wow, it's pretty bigoted that she says that Mexican guy. And then we immediately understand why she is calling to the fore his ethnic identity because
it's actually relevant. It's actually important if he'd be Mexican. It's actually relevant to the context of the actual story. Okay, so it's actually okay to call people Mexican when they're Mexican. Sometimes if you're actually talking about them being Mexican, it's actually because it's going to be a problem because her parents are actually bigots. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I do think we could talk Jessica through a little bit about how to talk about someone's Mexicanness potentially, but we're not there yet, and that's okay.
Is this one of the panels you give? How to talk about someone's Mexicanness? I'd love to hear it.
I would love to include you.
Chapter 9, Molly at the bank.
The cool sanctuary of the Union Bank. Maybe it's just because it's a bajillion degrees here, but I highlighted that and was just like, God, I just want to be in a bank. I just want to be in a bank. Could you imagine, like, they have the little mints out and it's so cold and everything's made of marble and there's money everywhere. Oh, what a dream.
Basically, like, Liz has gotten a hot tip from Car Walker that the girl's going to be at the bank because she heard at the office, like, someone telling someone else she was seen at the bank or something. She was asking for directions to the bank. Like, so stupid, but whatever. Cool sanctuary.
She is, again, in this kind of Hamletine indecision. What do I do? What do I not do? She ends up getting out the money. Then Liz comes upon her.
Liz tries to talk to her and she just cuts it off and is like, no.
So yes, and we know, you and I know, readers know that Liz is trying to say, hey, I want to be there for you. I don't blame you for what happened with Regina. I want to be your friend. I want to love and support you through this. And yet, what Liz says is, Molly, please, we need to talk about Regina and what happened. Molly, no. Justin and I need to talk this out with you. We all need... And like, then Molly says, no thanks. I've been your scapegoat long enough, Elizabeth, so you can just take your talking and shove it, which I thought was a great line. But it's like, Liz, you know that Molly is predisposed to think you're going to be being mean to her. So do the being nice quickly. Start with the being nice. Say the nice things. Say it. Say it.
Like, it's sort of hard to buy because you would think even if her words weren't exactly right, by her demeanor, she'd be able to put out that she was like trying to connect and not trying to be blaming. Like she was trying to be either apologetic or conciliatory. Like you'd think she'd be able to convey that before she could cut her off, but like we need a book. But also it's interesting that then Molly's reaction is like, when Elizabeth mentions that she talked to Justin, Molly felt her face grow hard. Why was it that when Elizabeth talked to Justin, he listened, but when Molly did, he bolted like a frightened rabbit? Her eyes narrowed with a rage she didn't know she could feel.
I like totally sided with Molly in that. Like, what the fuck? So Justin tries to see Molly. He waits for her after her class. He skips his own class. Chrome Dome, the principal, Mr. Cooper, comes upon Justin, says, "You have detention," keeps him in detention.
Chrome Dome also is so harsh on him. He's like, if you keep this up, I'm gonna bust your tail right out of this school. Maybe that would get through your thick skull.
Not nice.
I'm like, Chrome Dome's like rude.
Yeah, I agree.
Then we get a very special conversation with Mr. Collins in the Oracle office between Penny, Liz, Jess, and Olivia. They're all doing sense making, and then Mr. Collins comes in and helps them with their sense making. Penny's wondering, why do people do drugs? They should know it's a dead end. There's information out there that drugs is dangerous. Jessica's like, it's Molly's fault. Liz is like, no, it isn't. And Collins reinforces, maybe she had some responsibility, but ultimately it was Regina's choice. And then he says the thing about we all have responsibility, right?
I love that.
And then he also like teaches them how to have empathy for Molly. He says, like, think about how people have been treating her and how it is for her. And they talk about how, like, yeah, but it helps us to like have someone to project our pain onto. And he's like, but think about her pain. Have you considered that she's actually grieving, that she actually has feelings? And slowly he sort of wins them over. Jessica's like avoiding his eyes, being like, but she's really messed up. She's into drugs. And he's like, well, maybe there's some reason for it. Maybe she's gone through pain. And how's she supposed to get out if everyone's always just mean to her? So like, I think he really helps them like move that along and helps them start to develop empathy for her, or see that they should try to have empathy for her. And then Penny says, there's another story we should run. And the story is about how we actually all are responsible for helping people. And it's not enough to just say, don't do drugs. We have to help people if we know that like they're in a situation.
I agree. And I like this, his vision of, we all have a responsibility to make sure our friends are all right, to keep an eye out for trouble. Like, I like this kind of socialist approach to community care. I think it's beautiful. Justin tries to go to Molly's house. She won't see him. Or
her mean parents are like, she can't because she's grounded.
And at least her parents, I mean, her parents are doing a much more successful job of kidnapping than Regina's aunt. Who's, of course, not an aunt, but
yeah, I mean, she's not walking back and forth in the background, having a concerned look on her face. Oh, this part I had to read a bunch. I was just like, what the fuck? I guess before he tries to see Molly, he's at home looking at his mother, right? We talked about how his mother has a pills addiction ever since his dad was murdered. He's tucking a blanket around her. She doesn't stir. She slept the heavy, dreamless sleep of a person on tranquilizers.
I know, jealous, right? Rub it in.
It was time he did something about her, he told himself. It was no use pretending there was nothing he could do about her dependence on sedatives. There were no excuses for anything. Whatever her faults might be, his biggest fault was not trying to help her before now. And then he makes a meager cheese sandwich and he thinks about how frustrated he is. Are they trying to equate him like helping his mother or having a responsibility to help his mother's pills addiction to like the kids looking out for each other as peers? Because I'm like, that is not the same. If we're supposed to think that what Justin's saying is true or wise or whatever, then we're supposed to think, oh, the problem in his household is that he's been avoiding his responsibilities to help his mother's pill addiction. Like, I don't think so.
Yeah, this gets into what you were talking about in previous books about like the responsibility of kids to their parents and the extent to which, I mean, that's like not appropriate.
No, like he needs a caregiver.
Yeah. And she probably needs a caregiver, not to put too funny.
She probably needs some kind of support.
Yeah. Liz calls Justin once Justin goes back home from trying to see Molly and says,
I saw her at the bank with a bunch of money. She's probably running away. Let's go get her.
Yeah. They see Molly getting into her mom's car. They follow her. Then they see her meet up with Buzz at Kelly's. And Justin's like, I'm going to follow them. You go call the cops and tell the cops where they're going.
Can we just say blah, blah, blah? They get into their car climax. If Buzz tries to actually poke Justin's eyeballs out, I think, and then Justin punches him, cracks Buzz on the jaw, and then we get the line, the drug pusher went limp. Justin's grasping for breath. He tells Molly we're going to be okay. She stumbles forward into his arms. Their nightmare's over. And then I guess the cops come and get him. And the capturing of Buzz, I do think sort of like reinforces the narrative. It's like someone had to be punished for Regina's death. I think it would have been more interesting if no one got punished. Having Buzz be the one to like take the fall at the end sort of helps alleviate Molly's guilt or Justin's guilt. He actually goes to jail basically for this. You know what I mean?
He's not getting caught and going to jail for the death of Regina. He's going to jail because he's a drug dealer who was dealing to underage kids.
Right. But like symbolically.
Oh. I did not read it as Buzz going to jail for like as the scapegoat or as the blame for Regina's death. I read it more as like this guy is unsafe to be around and we're putting him in jail for that reason.
Right, but I'm saying it simplifies it in a way that I think it would have been nicer if it weren't. The system's putting the blame on him, so now we can sort of locate it in that and then not think about it anymore versus having to like continuously engage. You know what I'm saying? It makes it more tidy in that way. I see you don't agree, it's fine.
Okay.
All right. We get a nice moment in the Oracle.
Where good things happen, the Oracle office.
Funny.
Thank you. Blah, blah, blah. Like, basically, Molly's like, now I'm into school again. I want to be good. I want to get the scholarship. I want to go to college.
And we have the nice thing about Liz telling her, I think it's good for you to apply to that scholarship, and it would be great if you like get clean from drugs, and that would be appropriate to make it explicit. This is actually very progressive. This is an extremely progressive. I didn't think I would see this at the end of this book, right? Considering that like so many people have blamed Molly for this, for her to specifically apply for it and get the scholarship that is in honor of Regina's death, I would think people would take offense to that. But I agree with the principle of it, and I think it's a very progressive principle, which is what it's actually saying, and what Elizabeth is saying by saying you would deserve it, is that to overcome substance issues is equally a wonderful accomplishment and achievement as, and this is ideological and actually ableist, and we should talk about it, but as overcoming a quote unquote handicap. What does it mean to overcome? I mean, the idea that Regina quote unquote overcame a disability is extremely ideological. I think it's actually very offensive.
Yeah.
The idea that you should have a scholarship just for having a disability. What does it mean to overcome it? Literally, what does that mean? That she went to a mainstream school? That she ended up getting these very expensive Switzerland treatments in the end that her family could only afford because they were rich, that restored her hearing? Is that what overcoming is? Like, what the fuck are they talking about? It's actually very problematic. But
Of course.
assuming that we take that as good, which we shouldn't, but assuming that you see that that's something to be valued, that's supposed overcoming, to then say that that's equivalent to overcoming the substance use, which is extremely stigmatized, is actually a very progressive statement. So I thought that's very beautiful, the idea that it could actually be, she would be appropriate for that scholarship. I thought that was amazing from that perspective, like surprised by that, pleasantly. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. I agree.
Is that how you,
I felt
were you also
similarly,
surprised? Like, because I was like, oh shit, she's actually going to apply for the Regina thing after they just got over the fact that Regina died in her home. Like, I'm like, great, but okay. You know, it seemed like, oh.
Yeah, I liked it though. I was happy. I was too busy being happy to be surprised.
All right, I was equally happy as you. I just want to make that clear. All right.
Yeah, you made that very clear.
And then we get a sort of forked cliffhanger, which we love. When we have a special edition, which is going to be the first thriller.
Oh,
and
of
then,
course. Sorry.
And then we have the subsequent regular edition, but so we have both cliffs. Go ahead.
do just want to say, I'm hoping this is part of the next book and it's just being planted, because we do see a notice for an all-state cheerleading competition with prize money. And I was very excited about that, like a little Bring It On situation.
Well, I told you, there's a 3-part sort of mini-series later in the series all about cheerleading.
Sure.
V for Victory, Jessica Quits the Squad, and
Pom-Pom Wars?
Pom-Pom Wars?
Or whatever.
But that's way later, so I don't know if there's something, maybe there's something before that, I don't know.
So we're walking through the hallway. Jess and Kara see a couple. Didn't you see who that was? Kara's eyes were wide with surprise. No. Sandy and Manuel? No. Are you sure? Positive. And what's more, I asked Jeannie this morning if there was anything going on between them, and she wouldn't tell me. They reached the playing field to join the rest of the team. Jessica glanced quickly at Jeannie, who was warming up with the others. She dropped her duffel bag and looked around. Where's Sandy? She asked innocently, keeping her eyes on Jeannie's face. The other cheerleader's arm stopped mid-swing. Oh, she said she'd be a little late, she said in a casual tone that didn't deceive Jessica. Cara and Jessica exchanged a meaningful look. If anything was going on between Sandra Bacon and Manuel Lopez, it was too hot to keep a secret. But with parents like Sandy's, something like this could reach the proportions of Romeo and Juliet, a story we've recently told with cheerleaders. Fine, we'll start when Sandy gets here. Will Sandra Bacon's narrow-minded parents destroy her chance at happiness with Manuel Lopez? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 42, available January 1988. But coming next month, the first Sweet Valley High super thriller, Double Jeopardy. The Wakefield twins become interns at Sweet Valley's newspaper and find themselves in serious trouble when Jessica witnesses a crime. She knows she must find the murderer before she and Elizabeth are killed.
So that's the next one. And then what's the Sandy Bacon Manuel one called?
It's called Caught in the Middle.
Okay. Thoughts, feelings?
No.
I'm so excited for the first thriller.
I'm excited for the first thriller. I'm obviously very nervous about how this text is going to handle Hispanic people. Post-thriller.
I did note that I think like when we heard Jessica describe Sandy's parents as bigoted, I think that's the first time we've heard that type of word, right? We certainly haven't heard racist, but I think bigoted is the most sort of specific. Because, for example, when we had Susan Stewart dating Gordon Stoddard, with his parents, they just talked euphemistically of like, oh, they're that way, and you know, they have their ideas or whatever. Like, we've never actually heard specific like mention of like, or like identification of something as bigotry. So that's something. True. Right? Just that exists. That concept exists for these people. Like before, they've only sort of vaguely suggested such a thing. So it's interesting to see how the naming happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited and nervous.
Well, if you have a friend who in her house, someone did 2 lines of coke, they didn't know probably that they had a heart murmur, had a very rare reaction that led to a fatal cardiac event. They probably could use something to lighten the mood. Maybe not this episode, but you know, share the podcast in general with your friend.
This would be way too close. I also feel like so many of us have people in our lives who are having a hard time, are feeling isolated, are feeling alone. And it's hard to know how to reach out to them. It's hard to know how to make that first step. And so maybe the first step isn't saying, hey, want to grab coffee? Instead, maybe the first step is saying, hey, listen to this podcast.
And if you are feeling alone you feel that you don't have friends, you certainly, I mean, you're clearly already listening. So you've taken the first step. You obviously have a good head on your shoulders. But are you remembering to be actually having empathy for us and thinking about us having the high ratings? And have you actually opened your app and given us a rating? And have you actually written a review?
It's so important to having written a review. The most important thing you can be is having written a review.
I wish I could say it better.
You can't. But what you can do is hang up this and play because it's your moving backgammon. I love you.
Thanks for listening to Sweet Valley Hive, hosted by Robert Marks and Rebecca Pardo. For more, check out our Instagram at Sweet Valley Hive. Theme song by Yessie and artwork by Elliot Carroll.